All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to March Women in Technology session. My name is Serpil Bayraktar, and I'm the founder of the program. We have a very special guest today. I'm so delighted to introduce and welcome Jamie Smith to the Cisco WIT community. Jamie is the Chief Marketing Officer and the Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Civility. I love that word. We can all use more civility in our lives. To talk to us about her fascinating career and what he's seeing now as he moved from more government position to maybe the open source community, which we are all very interested and invested in. So without further ado, please welcome Jamie Smith.
On. How about that? Good? I always find the irony of speaking on technology or to technology communities is that the technology doesn't always work. All right. Well, hi. Thank you for having me here. It is a pleasure to meet all of you. A little humbling and daunting. There's a lot of you, which says a lot about this program because it's been around for, 5 years? So clearly you are all getting a great deal of value if you're coming to all of these sessions, and that says a lot about Cisco. So I'm honored to be here. I thought I would try to weave in two topics that are really important to me and see if I can say a few things that you might find interesting. And if you don't find them interesting, just nod and pretend you think that's super interesting. So here's a little bit about me. I've had kind of two different lives. I don't know if you noticed, but the party that I affiliate with lost. So we moved into a different direction of kind of embracing the private sector world. So I started my career working in government/policy. I've had the honor of working for some really amazing women in particular. I started out working for Congresswoman Lowy, who's now the head of the Appropriations Committee in the House. It's a super powerful position there, very proud of her. I went on to work for Secretary Albright, Madeleine Albright, for about 5 years and traveled the world with her after she left office from 2002 to 2007. I then went from there to Hillary's campaign, where I was a traveling spokesperson for her 2008 race. I don't know if you heard about that, but she did not win. And that's the first one she did not win. But that was 18 straight months. So after almost, I think that's 7.5 years of literally 99% travel on the road, decided to slow it down. I actually, somewhere in there, got married and went to the Senate, where I worked for Senator Jay Rockefeller, who was the head of the Intelligence Committee, which was a super exciting experience until the entire economy crashed. And so he was asked to step down from that role and take over the role of the head of the entire Commerce Committee. And the Commerce Committee oversees your industry. So in a very short period of time, I had a lot to learn. And of course, there was a lot going on in the Senate, just kind of trying to rebuild the whole economy. I stayed there for about 2 years and then got a call from the Obama administration to go and head up communications for what's called the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which is the organization that was created after 9/11 to coordinate all 17 intelligence agencies. So that was easy. And then from there, I went to the White House, where I was a spokesperson and Deputy White House Press Secretary to President Obama. And I did that for about 3.5 years, and I served on the White House Council on Women and Girls, and did a lot of other. At one point, somebody came up to me and they said, "We're going to need you to be in charge of all of the stories about race." I'm like, okay. Not a lot of those with the first African-American president, but as you can imagine, these are some stressful jobs. Somewhere in there, I had a delightful little girl. And so after about a year, I think she was about a year old, I decided to go work for a big PR firm, Edelman, which was wonderful. And in that scenario, I started to see a lot of overlaps between the world of public policy and the way that the government works and the way that the public sector works. And in that job, you get to work with a ton of different companies, from Western Union to Cisco to PayPal to you name it. At one point, I was even working for the NFL. So you learn a lot, and I sort of racked up a lot of these different experiences along the way. I'm just going to try to, so these are fun little logos summing up what I just said. But I now work with the Linux Foundation, and that probably seems like a really strange route that I took. But somewhere along the way, while I was working at Edelman, I went on to, I was recruited to work at a startup. And I'd never done that before, so I thought, well, that will be fun. And it was particularly in the blockchain space, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about. All this hype around blockchain and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And I said, well, that's so interesting. And it was. It's such a new space that, of course, within like 3 months, I was the co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Blockchain Council because there was nobody else to do that job. But I learned a lot. I traveled around the world, again, for a couple years doing that. And then what I really learned was there was this entire world of open source. And that was actually a much bigger, more comprehensive world that was happening. And that while blockchain is interesting, there was something much bigger happening in the world. And there's a lot of people who make laws and rules, particularly in this country, who literally have no idea what I just said. Like none. And to me, that is a pretty massive economic security challenge, national security challenge, communications challenge. And I'd always heard about this gap between the West Coast and the East Coast, not from like a music perspective, but like tax policy perspective. But I feel like I'm kind of living it. I'm watching myself have conversations with people in DC where I live. I spend a lot of time out here, and it's like blank faces. I mean, just literally blank faces. They're like, I feel like I've heard of that. When GitHub was purchased by Microsoft, this one gentleman I know who's a pretty big mover and shaker in DC came up to me at a party and he said, I don't know what you're doing, but I think it matters. I was like, yeah, I don't know if what I'm doing matters, but this space matters, and you need to get a little smarter on this. So I'll go into that a little bit further, but I do think that kind of nexus is something that I'm exploring and really spending a lot of time thinking about. So what you're experiencing with me talking about this is actually me thinking this through, so thank you for your patience as I think through it. And I do want to make a caveat that I'd like to stop talking at some point so that you can ask me questions, but more importantly, I can hear from all of you, because the most important thing that I've learned is the most important lessons I've learned are from the people that I'm talking to who actually live out here in this space. So just as a background, this is actually who I work for. And I got another one coming if you haven't noticed. So this is what drives everything I do. And I say that because they're so cute, but also because the world that we're talking about it's their world, right? And this is why it matters. So policies. So I've tried to kind of sum up, this interconnectedness between the public side and the private side. And the thing that brings us all together, obviously, is that all industries have a governance structure, and they have a way of kind of mapping decision-making and how that information flows, right? And you hear when you're in the government that its private sector is doing this so much better. You really never hear that government's doing it so much better, but the truth is that both sides are doing things really well, and both sides are doing things probably not as well as they could. But what's amazing to me, and what I want to just pause on, is that in the time that I was in the Obama administration, this might surprise you, but the very best thing that happened to the United States government in that time was when healthcare.gov didn't work. You might be surprised by that, because that was obviously really embarrassing to the president that he was launching this big platform for people to get their healthcare, and it literally didn't work publicly in front of the world. But what it did, and the reason that was such good news, is it forced people in government to actually hire a whole bunch of people who don't work in government to come in and look at the systems and say, what are you doing? This doesn't even make any sense. And it had all of these new people in our orbit who were volunteering their time or not, or paid or whatever, who were bringing a really fresh perspective and a reminder that we are not communicating enough. We are becoming very separate worlds. And there was this joke in the Senate Commerce Committee, because the older chairman from earlier in the 2000s was, may he rest in peace, this man from Alaska who's probably heard of it. He's famous for describing the internet as a series of tubes. And it was obviously embarrassingly hilarious that he didn't understand how the internet worked and his job was to regulate it. But I have to tell you that from what I've seen since I was there, and let's just bookend that with the, let's say, Mark Zuckerberg hearings, the situation is worse. I mean, these people literally have no idea, and it's very hard to solve the challenges that we're facing in today's world if your main question to Mark Zuckerberg is, what's your fundraising platform? I mean, like, how are you raising money? And then we're doing like very 101 with elected officials who should be much more educated. So let's go to the next slide. Here's the key problems, I think. Number one, and this is sort of trying to bridge the two worlds together, dysfunctional communities create dysfunctional policy. Doesn't matter what policy you're trying to create, whether it's healthcare, national security, policy in your own company, maybe even policy in your own home. If it's not functional, then you're not going to create functional policies. And turns out dysfunctional communities create dysfunctional code. If you don't have the right systems and the right process and the right people in the room, you're not going to, in my opinion, create the code that actually is going to both make a better company, a better product, and frankly, a better world. So secondly, jurisdictional fights will kill your plans. And jurisdictional fights, kind of a Washington word, but you know what I mean. It's turf wars, right? If you have one department that is really fighting with another department, or you have one committee that's really fighting with another committee, I guarantee you it will be messy and very bad things will come out of it, or they will just literally die. Here's an example. So when Rockefeller stepped down from the intelligence community and went to commerce, his first thing he announced he was going to work on and issue a comprehensive cybersecurity bill. Great idea. Good, very important to do, right? Pardon me. Senator Lieberman was the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. And he went up to Rockefeller in the hallway and he said, "What are you doing?" "That's what I do." And Rockefeller said, "Well, that's also what I do." And they thought about it and they talked about it in a not super friendly way, I'm guessing. And Rockefeller said, "Look, commerce is commerce. Cybersecurity matters. And why don't I introduce a bill and you introduce a bill, and then we'll come together and we'll bridge the bills together." And Lieberman was not happy about it. And so in the end of the day, 2.5 years of work, and some of the most brilliant people I've ever known who know about cybersecurity work on these bills, and they never could get it together. They never could get it together. And in the end of the day, 6 years later, I'm in the White House and President Obama issues an executive order on cybersecurity, because at a certain point, somebody's got to do something. But the turf wars were so unproductive that it's really critical at the beginning of a process and solving a big problem that the leaders can get out of their own way. That is what I've learned, and that crosses all lines. Third, and this is my area of expertise, I have this funny story. I have a 98-year-old grandfather. He's turning 98 this weekend. It's awesome. Yay. And like still dating women and drinking. I mean, he's just a total rock star. True story. But he always asks, we have this running joke where he pretends he has memory issues and he doesn't, and he'll say, "What do you do for a living again?" And I always say, "I take complicated things and I make them make sense to people." And he's like, "What do you do again for a living?" We do this over and over again. So that's what I do. And the reason that I do that is because I have sat in meetings, so many meetings, thousands of meetings. I've also been the person in the meeting who is pretending to know what you're talking about. I'm really good at it, like really good at it. I'm like, you would think when you walked out of a meeting, you'd be like, "She gets it." And I'm like, yep. And I think people in Washington are particularly trained in this skill. I remember my first job ever was working in the House of Representatives, or my first like real job. And the lobbyists across the table from me were Apple lobbyists, which you think like, I know about apples, we all know about apples, we love apples, right? Whoa, I did not know anything about apples. These are like serious stuff. There's all these Apple vendors and the economy of apples, and it was just incredible. I mean, that was my first lesson in learning how to pretend that you know a lot about what the person on the other end of the table is talking about. And then you walk away and you go read all about apples. But that apple metaphor kind of continues 20 years later to be very relevant in my life, because I've watched people, particularly between tech and policy decision makers, and even, much to everyone's surprise, between maybe even like a member of the C-suite and tech people in the same company who are just talking to each other and talking and talking and talking, and the person is going, because no way are they going to admit to you they don't know what you're talking about. We've had so many incidents. I haven't witnessed these per se, but I've only been at the Linux Foundation for a little while, but our chief strategy officer says there's endless moments where the CIO of a company will say, oh, we don't use open source. No, we don't use that. And then they'll go talk to the tech people who are like, yeah. But there's just disconnects all over the place. And there's this famous quote, as you see at the bottom, that the biggest problem in communication is the illusion that's taken place. And it's true. I mean, you think when your own relationships, this is something that bridges all divides, and it takes me back to my picture of my kids, which is I'm teaching them how to use their words and to find their words. And I realize I do that all day long. I teach people who are 70 how to find their words, people who are 40 how to find their words, and 3-year-olds how to find their words. And I realize, look, this is really the greatest barrier in society today, is that nobody is really doing a very good job of finding their words. And part of what I've had to come to understand is I need to not be afraid to say, I don't know what you just said. You're not making sense to me, in a nice way. But for example, when I went into the intelligence community, I had no choice. I was in charge. And the message was sent from the top down that I was in charge. And so I would walk into a room. I was the only woman and the only non-military person in many cases. And the first meeting I ever went to, the acronym use was so out of control that I actually stopped the meeting and I looked at them and I said, are you just messing with me? And everybody laughed because they felt so bad. They're like, I'm so sorry. It's just we don't even realize that we're doing it. And that's the truth. People really, they're not trying to be jerks about it. They don't understand that the world that they're operating in doesn't actually make sense to you. And I kind of call it like the black box, right? Everybody's just, they want so badly to show you how smart they are that they're missing their ability to communicate. There are some who just assume you know what they're talking about and the technical level of what they're doing. And people really, if you watch how people communicate, and I do as a science and as a career, really everybody's just, if there's a mistake people are making, it's that they're skipping what I call the top line. They're just not, hitting the main top point first. They usually go right into the middle. And so it's your job as the leader to say, can we just back up a second? Let's just go to the top first, and then we'll drill back down. But I need you to explain to me, why should I care? Right? It's one thing for me to be like, hey, legislator or decision maker, this is open sources. It's another thing for me to say, here's why you need to know about it. Because 80 to 90% of the technology we use is actually using open source. And then it's a whole different discussion. When it's about your stock market and your networks and all of the things that make your day run, that's actually really interesting. Side note, we just launched a program last summer where they're using open source to make movies. This is the first time my husband's been like, okay, now I get it. So whatever, it just comes back to the question of why should I care? This fourth point is part of 3, frankly, but it's this knowing look, the black box, complete disconnect, no progress, right? People just walk out of the room, they're like, got it. Nothing happens. And then too much admiration for the problem. And this actually is my DCI connector here a little bit, but I am totally guilty of it too. I try really hard to stay away from it, but I'm super good at talking about the problem, right? To like no end. And we all sit around, we have drinks, and we're like, let's talk about that. Yes, this also bad thing happened. Problem, problem, problem. But I think as a leader and as a growing leader, especially in industry, your job is to listen to an extent and then pause and say, okay, solutions, period. Let's just talk about solutions. We all get the problem. We can fight about the problem. We can talk about little variations on the problem, but we all know there are not enough women in tech. We all know that diversity is a challenge. So let's accept that as a bad reality, not accept it, but let's talk about the solutions and what can we be doing about it. So I'll move forward here. Sorry, this is moving a little bit slowly. I don't think I'm able. Perfect. Well, it's on solutions here, but it's not moving here. I don't know. There's a way. It's always the tech. Well, so the biggest first solution is if you ever find yourself saying things like, well, it's really complicated at the start of your explanation, think again about how you're going to explain something. And I do think that there's no end to people who also may have not such a positive agenda, particularly on the policy side and the government side, who would really like you to think that their issue is too complicated for you to understand. And let's be clear, the reason they're doing that is because they don't actually want you to get that involved in it. It's in their benefit for you to not understand it so that they can continue doing things that are maybe not in your interest. And so I just refuse to accept that things are too complicated. I mean, like quantum is complicated. I can't tell you how many people who work on Middle East peace will tell me it's just too complicated for you to understand. I'm like, okay, well, seems like we should all pretty much understand, okay? Because that seems like a big issue, and I don't think that it's too complicated for people to understand peace and love and war and all of these big concepts. We're all living it, we're all experiencing it. And you just start to learn the people who say these things, healthcare, it's so complicated. Well, maybe you've made it really complicated because you actually don't want to give benefits to a lot of people. I mean, there's all these, I don't want to totally impose my political views here, even though I'm doing it, but these are examples of ways where people will tell you it's super complicated. Hold on. We're going to go back. Yeah, I don't know what to, oh, there we go. Okay. Slight commercial. I'll go into this for briefly 2 minutes on the Linux Foundation and how we think we help on key solutions. The third thing, and you'd be surprised to hear me say this because I have spent time in the intelligence community, but stop keeping everything so secret. There's just too many kind of little buckets of information that are moving around, and all you have is data that's separate, information that's separate, silos of information, and as you know, these things are just not going to move the ball. It's just not going to move the ball if everything is a secret. And as we know, if you're keeping your code super proprietary or your project super proprietary, and then Heartbleed comes along or there's a bug of any sort, it's so expensive and so hard to fix some of these problems. I'm not saying there shouldn't be certain things that remain proprietary or secret, but we have to be careful not to over-index on keeping everything so siloed and secret, especially in this super interconnected world that we're living in. Number 4, I will say I love Senator Rockefeller, but I think one of the problems in his approach with his cyber bill and Senator Lieberman and everybody else who's followed through on this in the last 10 years, they're coming out with these comprehensive bills. And when anybody ever says comprehensive to me, I'm like, oh, because I know that it's probably not going to pass. And it's the same thing in industry. If you come with like just a gigantic plan, it's very hard to move these things forward because it's too much. And so, interestingly, if you want to take a look at something, those of you who care about cybersecurity, which I do a lot, there's this report that came out of the House Energy and Commerce Committee recently that was just giving 6 recommendations. And it was such a smart approach. It was like just acknowledging, hey, dear legislators, don't boil the ocean here. If you do these 6 things, you will see massive change and improvement in code, cleanliness, and clarity, and progress. And I just think this is such an interesting, especially in the challenging world that we're all living in, where everything just seems hard right now. But bite it out. I mean, you think of it in your own life. Like if you were to take all the problems that you have and the challenges you have in managing home and life and whatever, and you just try to do it all in a day, it's not going to happen. You just got to go like bit by bit by bit. This connects to the secret part, but the costs of fixing later far outweigh doing it right at the start. It's impossible to do everything right at the start, but again, if it's super secretive and you're operating in your own little bubble, chances are you're not getting the input that you need in order to make the right policy or the right code, et cetera. And then this is my North Star, which is I have such a high radar for, and I'm sure you all do too, for the people who just talk a really good game about diversity. It's exhausting, right? And I'm tired of it being a punchline and just kind of a cool thing, like a talking point that people say. Let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's actually make it part of the DNA of everything that we do. And guess what? Your company will run better, your policies will be better, the world will be better. I mean, it's just so simple to me. But whenever I hear somebody using it as a punchline or a talking point, I immediately know that we're starting off in a bad place. So let's move on really quick. This is like a little bit of a commercial break, but I do want to let you guys know that just this week, it would be kind of weird if I came here and didn't talk about this for a second. And don't be offended by our logo. We didn't try to copy yours. It's just a bridge. We're much smaller than you. Please don't see us as competitors more. You know, we're just complimenting all the bridge building that you're already doing. But we launched this thing called Community Bridge this week. And the reason that we did it is because we wanted to create a broad platform for developers to have the support that they need. We already support 1 million developers, and we support 1 million projects. We've literally onboarded a new member every single day of 2018 and 2019 so far. We have over 180 projects going on. It's very exciting. We think that the 3 biggest challenges in open source are funding developers, getting funding right into the hands of developers who are working on projects, helping with security, trying to advance the ball there because there's so much great code being created, but it's going fast, and there's some security challenges, and people, and particularly on people, getting more awesome, already in the process developers mentored so that they can take it to the next level. So I think about my own jobs where I was cruising along, and then all of a sudden there was this gentleman who hired me, and I learned a ton working for him in like 2 years. And to this day, when I tell people that I trained under him, it's a big deal. It's like, oh, well, then you must know all the other things, right? And if, you know, if you put a patch in, and I'm not a tech person, but I just know like a patch in the kernel, kind of a big deal, right? And like, if you have a mentor that's helping with that, you're already this brilliant developer, but you'd like that mentor service, then this is something we're trying to create, like a matching process. So, Community Bridge, super awesome. Funding, I won't spend too much time on this. You can learn more about it. Go to our website. Security, these are some of the things that now we can do for you. If you become part of Community Bridge, bug bounties, vulnerability remediation, detection, etc. These are words you probably all know a whole lot better than I do. And then people, which is the mentor-mentee process. So I'd love to hear from you all here at Cisco how that works, how you find yourself getting in a position where you can be working with the right people. And then for those of you who branch out into the open source world, if it would be valuable to you to have more mentorship. And this is where I think just real solutions to real challenges. I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking in advance of this, these comments about how when you're a rising leader coming into the workforce, it's kind of overwhelming. There's a lot to learn, and you think you're in the right positions, and people are developing you into whatever. And then at the very senior level, I think there's a lot of advancements that are being made to make sure that the numbers are more at parity and that we're having more leadership, more diversity at the leadership level. It's the middle that is a challenge for a number of reasons that I'm trying to fully understand, because I really want to help tackle that, of how do you get people who are kind of early mid-career catapulted to the next level. I think about it, if you look at the numbers in open source, they are sadly Pentagon sad in the sense of diversity. And what they've done at the Pentagon a lot is focus on not just getting soldiers, particularly women, into soldier level jobs, but how do you make them officers? And so if you think about that as an equivalent, how do you take these really talented developers and people in tech in general and take them from soldiers to officer level, and to being maintainers, to being in charge, to calling the shots? And so what we've heard in so much feedback over the years is that I don't want to leave my career. I would just love a little help for a few months learning that next skill so that I can take it to the next level myself. So that's that. But I'm going to close here. Here's more on how you can participate. I don't want to bore you with all this, but it's super exciting. There's so much that we're doing. Linux Foundation is trying very hard to serve all of its members and actually contribute a lot of money, give matching grants for diversity, incentivize people to make sure that if you are bringing on a mentor or a mentee, that they actually bring diversity to the process. Hopefully this will transfer to the next slide. Sorry. Hope I'm hitting this right. I know, no, I'm sorry, I don't know how to. Here we go. I love that quote. Exciting. All right, so I know that people call it D&I, diversity and inclusion. I have changed it at the Linux Foundation. Maybe I'll start a trend worldwide of calling it diversity, stability, and inclusion, because I think that that civility piece is so, so critical. Going back to that job where I was the only woman working in an all-male environment almost entirely in the intelligence community, I think people are surprised when I tell them that it was the most feminist, most empowering, most exciting job I've ever had. And that's not to say my other jobs weren't fun. But this one, there was just a cultural tone set at the top. General Clapper made it very clear that this is my head of communications, and this is the person who reports to the White House, and you need to give her the information that she needs and work with her. And there was just no dissent. There was no disrespect. There was nothing. It was just, we were people. Whether I was a woman or not literally made no difference. And I think that's just incredibly important, that it's not just diversity. It's not just inclusion. It's the culture that you're creating and how you actually make that happen. So I thought about this recently. I was asked to think about whether a topic that I wanted to speak on at a conference that was focused on this. And these were the choices that I had of topics. And it was dizzying. I'm like, oh my God, this is so much, right? I'm glad they're being so thoughtful. But in the same breath, like, it's just crazy that we're all dealing with so many of these challenges. So I tried to find a photo that made me feel like this is how that makes me feel. I'm like, oh my God. And it's not that I don't want a million panels talking about this, but I really just feel like conferences where all we're doing is talking about the problem, and then we're living the problem. How many people have sat at their desk like that? And it's like, look, I just came here to do a good job. I just want to work, and I don't want to feel like this all the time and be like the expert on all of these issues that, frankly, are exhausting. So I went to my mentor. I don't know if you know this woman. Her name's Valerie Jarrett. She was the senior advisor to President Obama for 8 years, and she ran the White House Council on Women and Girls. And of course, I'm giving her a little commercial because she has her book coming out in a couple weeks. But I went to her when I got this job, and I said, hey, I'm going to be working in advancing diversity and civility and inclusion in the open source space. What is your advice? What do you think? How do you think I should tackle this? How do you think I should really approach this? And I hope I'm not breaching her trust when I tell you that she kind of rolled her eyes. Here you have this woman who is an expert in advancing women, African American community, all sorts of communities, and spent her life working on these issues. And she said to me, she goes, you and I both know there is only one way to do this, and that is it. You can have all the committees, all the organizations, all the efforts that you want, one way, at the top. If you have a leader who says, these are the rules, and this is how it's going to go, and P.S., your bonus may be tied to how diverse your staff is, all of a sudden, ta-da, magic wand, there's diversity in the workplace. If you say it and you don't enforce it, you don't have diversity in the workplace. And that's it. Like, it's really just not that complicated. And she was right, and we laughed, and we hugged, and we shook our heads a little bit, reminding ourselves of that list and how you feel over your laptop. But I think, I'm not an expert on how things are running here, but from what I can tell, your CEO and your board are really focused on this. And it's clear from this room that Cisco is doing a phenomenal job of just setting a different tone and making clear that this is how it's going to be. And I always think about my little niece. She always used to say when she was little, and with her little list, she would say, these are the rules. These are the rules. This is just how it's going to go. And so I don't want to oversimplify this issue. Please don't be offended and think that I am, because I get how complicated it is. Trust me, I do. But it goes back to that whole, it's so complicated. Is it really that complicated? You know, I was talking to someone yesterday, and I said, do we have a pipeline problem? She's like, well, I'll tell you this. I just went to an event for lesbians who code. Pretty particular crowd. Lesbians who code. There were 1,500 people there. I don't think we have a pipeline problem. Just hire these people, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe we do have a pipeline problem. I don't know. I mean, I think that there clearly are challenges from like kindergarten through the end. There's something that's happening in middle school. Again, I'm not trying to oversimplify this. I get that some of this stuff is much more detailed. I spent a lot of time learning and reading about it, but there have to be recognitions that it's not that hard to find people who could be put in these jobs and make the extra effort to ensure that the pool of people that you are interviewing don't all look the same. I mean, it's just making the effort and making sure that at the top you're bringing in a lot of different thoughts here. So I will close out with some lessons that I've learned along the way, for what it's worth, especially some of our rising leaders. Some of you who've been around in the workplace for long enough will just nod and say, got it, of course. But I really have learned over the years to honor my voice. I don't care if people think I'm dumb when I say I don't know what you just said. I really don't. I understand that my staff may not want to do that, but it's my job as the leader to make it okay to say that and to put it on the other person, not in a confrontational way, but to make sure that they know that they're not being clear. I appreciate that they're really smart and glad that's established in the room, but they still haven't actually explained to me what we're talking about right now. And if my job is to explain their thing to a larger audience, if they can't get through me, then I'm surely not going to be able to explain it to other people. Honoring your health, I know that sounds maybe a little bit fluffy, but I have to tell you, these are hard jobs, and you work a lot of hours, a lot. I know out here, out west, you probably are encouraged to spend a little more time on your health, but I can assure you out east, not so much. So you really have to fight for that. I mean, carve time out on your schedule. Pretend you have a meeting sometimes and go for a walk. Just really take a minute to breathe. You will be a better worker. You will be a better person for yourself. You'll be better to children if you have them, partners if you have them, whatever. But it is just, I wish I had understood that a whole lot better in my 20s. I would have had a much healthier 30s. But I was just, you're just going. You're just going and traveling and doing your thing, and you realize that Cheez-Its for dinner turns out it's not so good for you. Build coalitions in every part of your day. It's hard to do, but it's really, really important that I've just found as I look back on my career that there's these pockets of people who I didn't even realize I was building coalitions, but when you hit hard times, personally, professionally, whatever, there's these weird little people around that you were nice to one day, or you had a meeting with one day and you forged a friendship with, and all of a sudden they will say to you, hey, can I help? Or, I just heard about this new job over here. I mean, there's just these weird things that these coalitions, just out of that humanity, will produce. I really have learned, these are, again, lessons I've learned. I have just a zero tolerance for bad teammates. I think they're toxic. And I spent a lot of time in my first decade of working putting up with that because I didn't think I'd have a choice. And maybe I didn't, but I do now. And I owe it to my staff to make sure that I do everything I can to ensure that those people are not in the mix. It's a really negative thing. It can really become like a cancer in a community that you're building in your department, in your job, wherever. So this is a little bit something I've learned in campaigns, but I find that particularly in presidential campaigns, I learned that the first 12 months of a campaign are kind of nasty. Everybody's like carving out their space and doing all these turf wars. And then when there's so much work to do and you're just driving to the last finish line, everybody shines because they have no time for the nonsense. So I kind of while I know it's not a super healthy thing to work at that pace, I love those last few days or months of any environment because everybody's just doing their job. And I try as a manager to foster situations where it kind of feels like that on a pretty regular basis. It's just not that you're overly worked, but that you're just performing at your best and all that other stuff kind of tries to drown out. If you're a planning person and you're trying to think through your career, especially rising leaders in this room who are thinking what to do, I always try to think 5 years ahead, but I can't go farther than that. Life's too unpredictable. This is a little bit of the coalition building, just kind of in different ways, but making an extra effort to find the diamonds hiding in plain sight. There are really amazing people that are working around you. I always say that, like, be nice to your interns because you'll work for them one day. But the truth is you will. And there are really, really brilliant people around who, if you just take a minute to hear what's going on with them, you will be blown away for the most part, especially in an environment like this. And I will say, as an extension of that, try to take a little time to take advantage of this place that you're working in, because I'm sure there's just a wealth of opportunity. I mean, clearly you're here, so you're trying to do that. But I've tried to do that more in life. I sort of treat my jobs as opportunities to be like in little university classes, learn and learn and learn. I really obviously have a very strong view on this, but facts really still do matter. I've started, again, receiving the newspaper at my home and holding it with my fingers, which I know sounds a little strange to maybe people who are born earlier than I am, or later than me, but it's really, really fundamental to how your brain is working and how you're processing the challenges in your own job and the policies that you're hearing about if you're actually reading like the news, not just the headline. Last but not least, I know this sounds so simple, but I really won't work for anybody who's not funny. When people ask me all the time, like, are there any parallels between Hillary and Obama and Albright and all these people, I'm like, yep, one, they're funny. Shockingly funny, actually. For women, unfortunately, that doesn't always transfer so well over the media, so you don't see that a lot with them, but like hilarious and love practical jokes. But really like funny human beings, and I think it's a sign of leadership that like you just can't take everything so seriously or you will crumble. And there's something about reaching those highest heights where you have to find a way to laugh. You just have to. And really just you cannot lose humanity, especially in those last 3 months or 3 days. People are people, life happens, you just gotta focus on that and then, communicate. And really the last thing is, I know this sounds so simple and I now feel like I'm like a self-help kind of guru standing up here and I don't mean to, but I'm saying this because I've been in abusive work situations. I'm sure all of you have or will be at some point, and I hate that that's a reality, but truly, don't accept it. Don't. Life is way too short, and it will take a lot out of your health, your voice, all of these other things, and it's a big part of diversity and inclusion, and it's just banding together and realizing that this is not okay. It's amazing when you actually take that stand how much progress is actually made, because usually the people at the top are not actually aware, and they would love more than anything to get that out of here immediately. So with that said, sorry to end on that sad little note there, but here's an awesome little quote. And I will just pause here. Kind of went around in a little circle there, but hopefully made a few connections that are useful. And I'd love to answer some questions. And really, more importantly, I'd love to ask you all some questions. I think this is just a repeat of what I've said already, but starts at the top, two-way communication. Make your plans achievable. We're all human, and diversity, civility, and inclusion must be part of everything that you do. So
for questions, please use
please
microphones here and over there, so everyone on the WebEx and remote can hear you. Please.
Yeah, sorry. You do have to come up here.
All right, I'll just ask from here. So hi.
Hi.
Very nice presentation and loved hearing it. I just want to ask you one question. How did you get started on this path? I mean, later on I understand you got calls from here and there and then you got hired to that position.
Mm-hmm.
But how did it start? How, did you take any program, like some course or anything where,
The path into my first job, like out of college?
First and maybe a couple more until you start getting calls
Yeah.
rather than you applying to them.
So I moved to Washington, D.C. after college. I thought I'd be there a year. I was sure I was going to go to grad school, probably business school. And I particularly just wanted to spend a little time working on women's rights. I remember calling my dad and saying, I got a job, and they're going to pay me $15,000 a year. I said, is that enough? And he goes, no. So I didn't take that job, but I took a similar job for maybe like $3,000 more. But but that was what I cared about. In college, as most of us in college, it happens, your eyes open to a lot of inequality in the world. And I knew that Washington was a cool place and that there were interesting things happening there. What happened to me, there were two moments that solidified everything for me. Was one, right when I got there, was in 1999-2000 at the change of the administrations and the election. And I looked around and there were all these young people working on presidential campaigns and working for Al Gore, and there was this recount, and they were traveling all over the world, and I thought, I gotta get in on this. But also the recount was very, very hard thing to really realize that this could happen, and I wanted to get more involved. I also realized quickly that I wanted to be in the room. I didn't want to be an advocate on the outside of the room. I totally appreciate people who want to do that, but I wanted to be in the room. These are just sort of big topic areas that you start to figure out as when you're learning about yourself. And so here I am kind of trudging along, trying to learn just the basics of how working in government works, working in politics works, and 9/11 changed everything, absolutely everything. And not only from all the obvious reasons, but professionally, the Democratic Party had almost no message on national security, and there were almost no women in this space. And so there was just, I tend to find myself, I'm highly competitive, and I liked the challenge of being a trailblazer in that sense, of trying to forge a new policy, a new form of communication, and be one of the only women in the room, and try to figure out what that looks like, and how do you make sure that then the next day there's more women in the room and more women in the room. So I guess I did go to Washington to work on women's rights, but in a different way, in my own way. But I always joke that when people ask me where I'm from, I always say Chicago, because that's where I am from. And my husband will look at me and he'll say, we've lived in Washington for 22 years. I'm like, all right, fine, I guess this is where I live. But like, Washington is a weird place. You never really feel like it's your place. But I've also really learned, I think sometimes I sound like I was a little bit Forrest Gumped through my career, because I got this call and this call and this call. And I don't mean to make it sound like that, but there's a truth to it, where one job has really led me to the next job and the next job and the next job. But I do think that there's one thing I read a number of years ago. I don't know if this is true, but it seems true. That a certain percentage of women, they estimate 40%, when they see a job opening, most men, if they have 40% of the qualifications, will apply. And most women, allegedly, will only apply if they think they have 80 to 90% of the qualifications. I remember reading that years ago and thinking, I'm going to do the 40%. And I know that feels bold, but it really, every job I've had in the last 10 years, I don't have all the skill sets, and I'm okay with it. But because I know the things I'm good at, I'm really good at, and I've proven to myself over and over again that I can learn the other things. I just need a boss who gets that when they hire me, that like there's a learning curve. So anyway, the long answer, I'm sorry, but hopefully I'm trying to sort of impart some like strange lessons I've learned along the way that, again, we've all had people we love who have had health issues, or maybe you yourself have, but as you learn in life along the way, like life is short. I mean, sitting around and waiting for somebody else to take a challenge, well, when it was presented to you, seems like not a great path. So, if there's something you see and you want it, try. What's the worst thing that can happen? You don't get the job. Yes.
Hi. I want to, I do share your one feature is laugh is important. For the organizers, we all want talkers who can laugh. I enjoy listening to the talks. But the thing I want to share about is the diversity and inclusion. So I share some of my story, and I see like because I worked in, like my whole life in tech, worked for 25 years. For first 20 years, I was an embedded systems engineer, and I was the only woman. And even today, I think women, I mean, I never questioned, because I know who I was, and I got into the job and just loved it. Women today don't go into electrical engineering or embedded system, like hardcore engineering. So even today, if you go to the department, you'll find one or two. So that continues. So the diversity and inclusion is also a problem from the other side. If women don't go into those fields, they don't get the job.
Can I ask you, though?
One more thing.
Okay, yeah, please, of course.
So I can finish my thoughts.
Oh, yeah, please.
I'm not so good at.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I notice is that when you talk about mentors and mentees, and I've heard that all the time. But and it's great, like, and you always hear the people who are here say, wow, they got their mentors. Why not me? And I've thought about it, and I think that maybe it's a tech industry, maybe I'm making excuses because tech job is so much that you're working on your own. I get mentors on Google. That means I look at the open source and learn it, but there's nothing like getting a real human being.
Yeah.
And it's not I'm not lucky or I'm not, but so just out there, if as a techie, if you don't get a mentor, maybe it's just the nature of a job.
Yeah.
Because it's so much, you don't get so much people interaction. It's not that great people are not out there. I've had many good managers, but I never made the connection to go all the way to the end the way you did.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. And the other part of diversity is very cute and strange here because, especially maybe it's in the tech industry again, that now we have diversity in race, fine. Diversity, and the thing is different. Once you know it, you know it. Tech industry, like your skill counts. Maybe your pay may not match, but skill counts. But now the real diversity is not showing up as the age. And managers have come. Like I got laid off 10 years ago, and I've done well since then. Like no worries. And it was actually because of that. For 20 years, I was in the embedded systems engineering. So I went to network engineering because I was looking for women.
Yeah.
I just wanted to have women. But they I was just part of the many, and I got laid off. Partly because of the age, and partly because I didn't fit. That's not a problem. The problem is managers will say when they interview people, the team will say, he doesn't fit into my culture. He doesn't fit into my culture. He's too old. What can the team do? Now the top doesn't work. So that, yeah.
All of that. So let me try to address it, but also ask a question in there. I'll go backwards. So the first thing on the ageism is totally illegal, and it should not happen. And I think that it's such a shame if that's happening, because when I hear that you've been in tech for 25 years, did you say 25? I have so many questions for you. Like, oh my gosh, what was it like in university? What was it like being, anytime I find any woman or any person of any, identification who is a trailblazer, I glom them because I want to know about their journey. I mean, how did you navigate that? Was it terrible? Was it good? Was it easy? Was it, all of these challenges? So I think it's such a shame culturally if anybody takes that tack, because there's so much to learn from, frankly, I would just say grown-ups who have actually lived the life that we're all aspiring to live, my life goals. How do you change that? I think, look, as we all age in our careers, I know that if I don't stay current on all the latest marketing tools and trends, it's not about anything except the fact that I don't know that. It's not my gender, it's not my age, it's just that I'm not as good as the next person. So it's all on us to stay as current and relevant as possible, but if you have all those skills and you're being discriminated against, then that's a real problem, right? So there's that. But I do want to go back to you on the question. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about that journey? I'm sure a lot of you read, there's this big New York Times Magazine article a couple weeks ago just talking about this evolution that in the 80s and the 70s, actually, there were a lot of women in tech, and particularly in software, and more men in hardware, according to this article. And now, something happened in the 90s where just the numbers went really low, and we've never really recovered from them. And I'm curious what your experience is since you've kind of lived it.
Right. So I think that I love tech so much, and so I feel I spent all my time with men and didn't bother. So I may have got affected by my pay, but I wasn't looking at it. I was just happy. Coming to work to me is like going to a bar. Always said that,
Right.
I'm a techie because this is what I do, this is what I am.
Yeah.
So ageism is there, but I think partly I always was running, take the train running, get on board while the train is running, and I take pride in that. So that's not the issue being current. But when ageism happened, like Cisco also was saying that we want to get young. I think Google went, that was the thing that happened. I have no, Cisco's a great place. I've enjoyed it, and I still enjoy coming here, and all that is great. I thought, at least I and I've had managers saying that, like people coming to her, and she says like, oh, I'm glad I dyed my hair. In fact, when I got laid off, I told my manager, I don't want to dye my hair. I chose not to come back to work. But the thing is, it's really coming from the team. The young people are saying we don't want to work with old people. How do you solve that? So that is something the manager gets threatened. I think nobody said that. That's why I'm saying that. So, and secondly is maybe as you say, like the tech is really going fast. And then when I'm still doing tech, but I'm doing through Google, like it's open source.
Yeah.
Because nobody can stop that. Like I write my own software. I'm the consumer. I'm the producer. And
well, but that is, if I may, that is the interesting thing to me about open source is that so many women I've talked to have told me that once they had the green light in their own companies to embrace and go out into the open source world, it really advanced their careers. And where they're finding barriers a lot is in their own companies not being allowed to extend into that space. But once they get over that hump, then their careers blow up. They have more experience, and so that's one of the reasons on the mentee side is that maybe one of those mentees and mentor matchups can kind of elevate somebody over that barrier.
Just want to finish this one. Yeah, I'll just finish this thought. I'm almost there. I'll just finish this thought. So what I was going to say is like when you talk about like keeping up, so maybe the tech industry also should may have to consider that it's being an athlete. Like the tech is going so fast that has to, like ageism maybe, like there may be a program where when you get older. That's it. Sorry. I'm done.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
That's all right.
No, I'm done.
Hi.
Hey,
Thanks for your patience.
it's okay. I learned a lot. So I wanted to ask, were you a part of the team that helped Linux adopt the contributor covenant?
No, I was not. But I am. You mean the fact that the contributor covenant is the code of conduct for the project? No, but I am a part of the team that is trying to ensure that every project has a code of conduct, that it's a workable, good code of conduct. And the code of conduct thing is really fascinating to me as a newer member of this world, if I may, just for a minute, in that they're not perfect by any stretch. But if you're somebody like me who's come into this space, you have to acknowledge it's kind of amazing that, almost from a sociological perspective, that these communities have adopted a code of conduct, that they've decided to self-govern and self-regulate. And, the enforcement is the hardest part, particularly in communities, projects where the maintainers are very powerful. So it is not an easy problem to solve. Yes.
Thank you.
Is that it? Okay. Yeah, hi. I know some of you have to get back to work. I'm happy to answer questions for as long as you want or as long as I'm allowed to.
We have one from WebEx.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, they really want to learn. Let's have one online and then
WebEx and then you. Yeah.
So this is from WebEx. Irrespective of gender bias, how can we maintain the humble and humanity if your team and environment had provoking people consistently?
So how do we maintain it if you have people on your team who are being negative and provocative?
Yeah, how do you maintain being humble and, humane or humanity? Have your sense of humanity?
I mean, I think we can all agree, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I just think we can all agree that if you identify a team member that is really toxic, it is the manager's job to hone in on that fast and gut it out. Because as we all know, it's just toxic. It really breaks down productivity. I mean, how many jobs or experiences have you had where you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, I gotta go work with Bob, whatever, Jane, whatever, whoever it is, but you just know that that person, for whatever reason, is just being allowed to behave in a way that you would never get away with, or another person would never get away with. But for some reason, this is being tolerated. And look, I'm not going to say this is easy. It's very hard. You take a lot of risks if you want to flag these things. But I think this is where these coalitions, these diamonds in the rough, are really important, because maybe you don't flag it on Tuesday, but maybe you kind of are working with other people to find a way to bring this to somebody's attention in a more effective way. and saying, like, this is hurting productivity. It's one of the best ways to get people's attention in business and a government and anything. I always say, if you want to pass a bill, make sure it has to do with money and security. It's the only thing anyone cares about. Same in business. It's got to be about the money. You got to show that it's actually bringing down productivity. It's not that it's making you sad. It's not that it's hard to get out of bed in the morning because you have to work with a nasty person. All that's true. But it's that it's actually affecting the bottom line. You get a lot of different ears when that's your claim. And you have to obviously be able to really back it up and make sure that you're not just trying to ding somebody, but it's like a real problem. But this is the way that, nobody wants negative people in a work environment. Nobody. It's just that sometimes a manager needs people's help to kind of help make the case a little bit differently. Last question.
It's actually a statement, not a question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Those
I'll
are
make
fine
it
too.
as quick as possible. So the military is the biggest feeder of technical roles into both the private sector and the non-military government sector.
Mm-hmm.
It is also the only job in the military that allows individuals to go in as enlisted and bridge into a role that allows them to have a livable wage with good set career paths that doesn't require them to be an officer. It's also the very first time in over maybe 40 years the military has allowed you to join the military as an officer without requiring a college degree if you are tech proficient.
Yes.
And they only launched that 2 years ago. As we know that the government only just now started building their cybersecurity command about 2 years ago, and just recently the non-military side of the government has opened a cybersecurity center of excellence at Fort Gordon as of 3 months ago. Miller Technical College, right out of Augusta, Georgia, being one of the only privately owned technical colleges around that area, only just now decided 2 months ago to open a cybersecurity degree, when most of the people in that area are not tech proficient, but it is the Silicon Valley of the government. My father teaches out of the Fort Gordon Cybersecurity School of Excellence, hence why I'm here. Thank you, Daddy. But he reports to me that majority of his students are male.
Are male.
Are male.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for that is the recruiting. The recruiters that are recruiting us are 90% male. The recruiters provide us with a list of things and jobs and MOSs that we qualify for after we get tested in the ASVAB. We also know that they create and cherry pick those lists based on the needs of the units around them. However, if an initiative was pushed for those recruiters to purposefully seek young women to join the military in those MOSs that don't require any previous standardization of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
you would see an incline in female participation in as little as 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
and it would quickly grow. Furthermore, they'd be coming from an environment where natural mentorship is a result of the military, just by the fact that you need to teach, learn, and climb
Mm-hmm.
to grow and promote and to stay in with a positive, let's say, rap sheet. That's my statement. I believe.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think so much of that is true. I will say the intelligence community, I've never worked in the military complex, and I do think that is super male-dominated. The intelligence community, even though the part that I worked in was so male-dominated, it actually generally is one of the most diverse environments I've ever seen. And frankly, that's because the intelligence community needs really brilliant minds, and they need them fast, and so they just don't, they've opened up a lot of pipelines for getting brilliant minds in the door. And so it's a great example, if only we could lift the veil and people could see, of a lot of really good workplace practices on diversity and inclusion, and hopefully civility. But the only thing I would say, just slight correction if I may, is that the cyber command and the cyber security work did not just start a few months ago. It's been going on for a long time. It's not as cohesive on the policy side, but particularly on the intelligence side, there's a lot that's been going on for a very, very, very long time. And I would definitely encourage everybody who works in tech to spend a little bit of time, the same way that I've spent time on this side of the world, spending a little time in that side of the world, and hopefully we can have more of that cross-pollination. Because again, one of the biggest things that worried me when I left and went into the blockchain space, and even now, is that, again, those blank faces I see in Washington, when I walk around Brussels, Tokyo, Shanghai, you name it, I don't see blank faces. They don't need an explanation. They know what open source is. They know what blockchain is. They know what quantum is. They know what all of these suite of emerging technologies actually are and how they're working together for the most part. And that is a major problem. I've never seen the United States generally, I'm just one person with one observation, but I think I've seen a lot of nods from people in this room and in other rooms who are seeing the same thing, and that's a real problem. We've always been on the cutting edge of everything. And right now I just feel like we are slowly becoming a little less informed than those who may be interested in having some of the power that we currently have. So not that it's like just a power game, but it is really important that we stay on the cutting edge. You know, this whole part, California and everything that you all have built out here for the last 30 years it's not impenetrable. And it's very important that we don't just keep talking about how smart we are and how, you know, all of just all the endless details of the tech, but we're actually communicating it in a way that makes people not afraid and makes it make sense for them. So anyway, thank you so much. It was a delight to be here. I hope this was useful, and I hope to see you all again someday soon.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you.
I really
That's
appreciate
so
it.
sweet.
Yeah, thank you for staying
I
a
didn't
little
bring you
over.
anything.
You brought yourself. Thank you. I hope it was worth your time. And in April, we have Kelly Kramer coming, so I'll send out the announcement. Thank you, everyone.
Yay, thank you. It's so funny. I was